John, we're joined by a titan of the industry, Bob Costas, as our guest this week.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. I think the best overall sports broadcaster. I always say that Vince Scully is the best baseball broadcaster. I think Bob would probably even agree with that. Everybody would. But overall sports broadcaster between the Olympics, the NFL, NBA, everything else, the talk shows. Bob Costas is really amazing at his job. And it's always good to have somebody who's amazing at their job here on our podcast.
Oh, John, we do it every week because you're amazing at your job. We'll talk to Bob about baseball, his work, and more. John and I will talk about the Under Siege playoff format right now. We'll play Hit and Error at the end. That's if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and Jon Heyman. John, the furor early on is this playoff format working? There was concerns last year if the format is working, mainly built around the idea that a couple of teams, the higher seeds, rest for a few days. Do they rust in those few days while the other teams take some momentum into the next round, into the division series, out of the wild card? As we're speaking, the lower seed is 6-2 in the first 8 playoff games. What do you think, John?
Well, I mean, there certainly is some evidence here that it's been a problem, that there is some rust. The teams with 92 wins, I think, are 1-8 now, all home games as well at 1-8. So it is still a small sample size. I think teams will still try, if they continue this format, which I have no reason to suspect they will not. Teams still will try to win the division, still will try to get that rest. And, maybe there's some antidote to it. Maybe there's some way to combat it. I'm not sure. But again, it's a small sample size. It's 1-8 this year. It's last year. I still love this format. I think it's the right format. The one thing I would say maybe, and I know a lot of people are against it, is that first round, does it have to be best of 3? Could it just be one game? I didn't mind the one game, and I know that the season is played over 162 and it often is decided by one game here or there. So to me, there needs to be a punishment if you are a wild card team, and that certainly would be a punishment. And a shorter wait might be, or some wait, but shorter might be a reward for the teams that are the best. That would be my only thing. I think there are probably a lot of different solutions being thrown around, but that would be mine.
Yeah, look, I would keep some things in mind. Number one, last year, a team that was a top seed and got this bye won the World Series in the Astros. They had the best record in the American League. They got a bye and they won. Also, this is very typical, John, I think, of our sport. We're always ready to kill ourselves. And we like things in other sports. We like upsets in other sports. Last year, the Miami Heat were the 8th seed. Yeah, I believe you're in Miami as we talk now, right? The city didn't commit harry-carry about this. They were thrilled. They got to the finals. The Lakers were a 7th seed. They got to the Western Finals. 2 years ago in the NFL, the Bengals were a 6th seed. They got to the Super Bowl. Last year, the NCAA Finals was a number 4 seed, Connecticut, beating a number 5 seed, San Diego State. This is known as an upside, not a defect in all these other sports. If we're just going to say that the best teams from the regular season should get through, then let's go to the old format that our parents grew up on, which was the American League best record will play the National League best record. That will be the World Series. There'll be no playoffs. If we have playoffs, there will be upsets.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at the whole picture, perhaps some of these teams that are good regular season teams, maybe they aren't built for the postseason properly. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, we all admire what the Dodgers do. If they lose this will be the 3rd in a row where they lost to a team that was 15 games worse than them in the playoffs. That's not easy to do, particularly when you do have the home field advantage. I do think some of it is the injuries. I mean, obviously the Dodgers starting rotation is depleted, so they certainly have a great excuse here if they don't come back somehow and beat Arizona and win this series. They're missing everybody but Kershaw from the original rotation. The Braves have some pitching injuries. Obviously, Fried was not himself, though they did win that game. They're without Morton. So, some of it is luck. I think that's more the explanation than anything. And, maybe there are teams like Philly, maybe they're built for the postseason. We'll see how they do. Obviously, as we do this, they're in for a dogfight now with Atlanta, which was the best team. But I'm not ready to abandon this yet. But if they did at some point, as I said, I might shorten that first series, and that's the only thing I can really think of that I like.
John, the Dodgers, we've been waiting all year. There's another shoe to drop. You mentioned it. Their rotation has been devastated by injury. They lost Julio Urias, to this alleged domestic abuse issue that he is on the outs on right now. He's not performing. Clayton Kershaw has been dealing with a shoulder injury and certainly didn't look like himself. They didn't take a bad swing against him. And, you could explain a lot of the losses by, Kershaw didn't pitch well. Bobby Miller didn't pitch well. Grayson Rodriguez didn't pitch well. And I understand the Orioles finished with the best record in the league, but they're not that much better, if better at all, than the Rangers. You line up those two teams, right. Their quality is very similar. The idea that the Rangers would beat the Orioles in a series is not foreign. Like the Diamondbacks are the surprise to date. We'll see. We're doing this staying evergreen. Who knows how it will end? But the Dodgers have been set up for a problem because of the quality of their starting pitching.
Right. I think Baltimore is extremely talented. They had a great regular season. I'm with you. I think that them and Texas are very similar. And shouldn't be a shock that Texas won 2 games, one by 1 run, one by 3 runs. Texas is really good. And, Baltimore is a very young team. I think Grayson Rodriguez might have been a bit nervous. This is a guy with ace stuff, better even than Bradish. And he's starting game 2. And I can't blame him for being nervous. Although the pressure was on him, and it feels like he was nervous. It feels like Bobby Miller was nervous. So, these teams with great records are relying on rookies, and, that can go either way in the postseason. So, yeah, I'm not ready to abandon this yet like several other people are. I'm ready to give it a go and see how it goes in the next few years.
John, I'll throw out a couple. I don't know that I would change this format. I think this format is fine. I think we'll see a lot of top seeds get through over, if we take a 10-year view of it. The idea, again, of overreacting when the Astros, the top seed, won the World Series last year, seems to me to be foolhardy. But I would think about, maybe to your point about the wild card round, using the Korean system, which is a best of 2. The lower seed, the top seed has to win 1 game. The lower seed has to win 2. So it could be, and so every game's an elimination game, potentially, and you give some advantage to a team that outplayed the other. One of the other ones I've thought about, and again, I wouldn't change anything, but just to throw it out, if you want to give the top seed some advantage, say to them, what format would you like to play in the best of 5 round? You could keep it as it is, 2-2-1. You can make it 2-3, the first 2 on the road, the last 3 at home, or you could do 3-2, begin with 3 at home and 2 on the road. If you want to change it, and one other wrinkle I would think about, if you win your division if you have a better record by 10 games or more than the team you're playing, you get 4 games at home. It gives a reason to keep playing late in the year in case you have an 8 or 9 game lead, brings significance to the regular season record. I wouldn't change it, but these are ones I would at least say, let's have a discussion about these.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's worth a discussion. I didn't mind the last 1 or 2 there that you gave, but I don't like that Korean thing where it seems like a gimmick. I don't mind the gimmick of the runner on second base. That, to me, makes the games more exciting, and their regular season games. Anyway, there are 162 of them. I don't want to see a team with a 1-0 lead to start a series. That for me, that's too much of a gimmick. So I would say no to that one. I would consider anything else.
Yeah, well, all rules are gimmicks, John, until they become established rules. The other big story, at least very much locally, but because they're such a national team, especially because of the owner, Steve Cohen, Billy Eppler, a few days after David Stearns was announced as his boss, you and I were there. Billy Cohen was sitting first row, looking right at David Stearns. David Stearns said, "I'm looking forward to working with Billy Eppler." And 72 hours later, Billy Eppler resigned. We were among those, John, we combined on a story with a couple of our colleagues, Mike Puma and Mark Sanchez. They're looking into improprieties about the injured list. Nobody seems to believe that's it, that somebody would resign over that issue. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously Stearns was completely unaware of this on Monday when they had the press conference. There's no doubt in my mind he had no idea that this was going on. So it came up quickly. He must, I don't know if he's wondering, what have I gotten myself into? I think in Milwaukee, he was there for 8 years. I don't know that there was any scandal or anything close to a scandal over those 8 years. He's been here, within 3 days, he's already facing a scandal, not him personally, but the team is. So but he's a New Yorker, so he kind of knew that things happen. There's more reporters here. There's more things that can go on here. Yeah, I mean, I'm like a lot of the people who originally said there's got to be more to it. What's really happening here? There are a lot of people who do this. This does seem like a minor infraction. It is, however, an infraction if he was stashing folks on the disabled list or injured list, as they now call it, who are not actually injured, and preventing him from having to decide whether to release them. But it does seem like a very small violation. But if it's up here now, we know that Billy Eppler, while great words were said, the Mets did not have a good year this year. He and Stearns were not especially close. Not that Stearns was in Milwaukee, so he was close to the Milwaukee guys. Not that they should have been. So, he's starting right now as the guy who was given to Stearns. He didn't get the choice here like he did with manager. And, he needs to be 100% clean, everything working out great at this point. So I get it. I get why he resigned, or perhaps was forced to resign, however you want to look at this. I understand it, but I can't say I've been the biggest Billy backer ever, but it does seem like if this is it, if this is the big thing, I think there might have been some other things involved, maybe rehab assignments or some other smaller things. This might have been the big thing. It does seem unfortunate because this is a common thing. I guess, you could say it's like speeding. He's speeding, and while there are other guys speeding, he was caught for whatever reason, and he obviously upset somebody who turned him in. So it's, I think, a little bit of bad luck for him, a little bit of maybe bad luck, maybe not for Stearns. We'll see. He's going to have his own replacements now, I assume. Don't know if he's going to hire a GM, but he's certainly going to hire people beneath him. I think it's just unfortunate timing for Billy Eppler, because he needed to have everything go perfect this first week. He couldn't get into any hot water.
Yeah, I tend to be an Occam's razor guy, John. The simplest explanation usually does this. It should be remembered by the people listening to our podcast. Billy was turned in allegedly by a letter sent to MLB. So this does not originate as an MLB found something out and decided to investigate. They were tipped off to something, and they very narrowly focusing on this injured list situation. And to your point, John, as we both do, we talk to a lot of executives every week, a lot of people in the game, and everybody was treating that possible infraction, to your point, like a speeding ticket. And right. Why would someone do it? So to me, if you're playing Occam's razor, the most likely thing is Steve Cohen had issues with the SEC in his previous life. People have been worried. He's trying to run a clean shop. He doesn't want the sense of impropriety. David Stearns comes in. He knows the history of the Mets. He doesn't want there to be impropriety. So, you turn to Billy Eppler and say, you could be fired or resigned. What would you like to do here? They probably are paying him off. That just is the most simple solution.
I think it's the most likely one. I mean, they're not going to reveal everything. Obviously, in that first press release, before we found out that the MLB was investigating, Eppler had said that he just wanted to give Stearns a clean slate. And, that is not untrue, but that certainly wasn't 1/10 of the story.
Interestingly, though, Stearns wasn't quoted in that. Right, the press release.
Right,
his hands stayed kind of like clean, and he hasn't come out publicly and talked about this. Though I'm sure we've all tried to get him to.
And he was kept away from the Showalter decision as well, right? So I'm sure he's in every big decision, and I get it. You and I both kind of espouse Buck staying on to finish out his contract and see how it goes, but I get it. He wanted his own guy, and certainly here you don't want to start out with some kind of scandal, even though, at least for me, it does seem like a minor infraction. It was just a combination of bad luck, and obviously Eppler upset some people in some way that had somebody turn him in, right? So it was Billy a combination of factors, and Yeah, he had enemies. A lot of bosses do have enemies, but this is obviously someone who really didn't like him quite a bit. Not just,
Yeah.
annoyed by the boss. He wanted to get back at him,
Yeah,
whoever
somebody
it
had been
was.
waiting for the right moment. They found the right moment and did it. John, I
Right,
would finish up this block by just asking a question. Again, we're both newsmen for a long
right.
time. We deal in the world of facts. We try not the conspiracy theories and witchcraft, etc. But the Mets are kind of a little cursed, aren't they? I mean, when you just think about how some of these executives have come down, Zach Scott, Jared Porter never really does the job. Carlos Beltran never does the job. John, we have a litany of Met stuff over the years.
Yeah.
Willie being fired at 3 a.m. in the morning. It's just a lot of things
Don't
that
forget
you
Mickey
mentioned.
Callaway.
Mickey
Yeah.
Callaway, yes, but the terrible off the field stuff. John, you mentioned it. It's a big market, but we're covering the other team in town just as hard, if not harder, than
Right.
the Mets. And this isn't the kind of stuff that falls on their head. Is there? You grew up in the Queens, Long Island area. Is there something in the water that I'm missing here?
No, I don't think so. And, obviously we expect things to turn around with a new owner who's obviously well-heeled, better than anybody else in the game, and wants to do anything to try to
Can't
win.
buy your
I
way out
will.
of a hex, apparently.
Yeah,
Like
no,
Porter is his, Scott's his, Epler's his. It's
right.
not gone great
Well,
so far.
no, it's certainly not easy getting the general manager that you want. I do think he has him now, even if he's called baseball president, and David Stearns, who's got a clean resume. Everything's great. We're not expecting any issues with him at all. We'll all be shocked if there are. So, I think at some point he was desperate to find people, and they didn't do a great job of vetting. Again, we'll see about this Epler thing. This to me seems fairly small potatoes. And Zach Scott, as it turned out, was not found guilty of the drunk driving, right? But I'm not saying it doesn't mean they're not star-crossed, because they let him go, and understandably so, when he did have the DUI hanging over his head, and he was acquitted of it, so it ended up being very minor. This may be fairly minor. We shall see, but I cannot deny that they do seem somewhat star-crossed. I did see the kind of hint or suggestion that the MLB is targeting Steve Cohen. We haven't found any evidence of that at all in this. This would not go up to the owner's level. This is pretty small potatoes, even if he had some inkling of it. I mean, what are they going to do? Fine him? This isn't really his thing. So I thought that was a bit overblown. But you're right. It's quite a long list over the last, over the last 3-4 years. It hasn't gotten any better from the previous regime in terms of the scandals.
Mets are going to Mets. They can't keep anyone in the job very long. Our guest is somebody who's done the job for a long time. He's won 29 Emmys. He's covered every sport you could cover. He does news. He does pop culture, but especially he's associated with baseball. And Bob Costas will join us next on the show with Joel Sherman and Jon Heyman. So there's some things that I kind of dread love. Hosting a show where the interview subject is Bob Costas. I guess I could have taught Pavarotti to sing at some point. Instead, we're doing this. Do I go through it? 29 Emmys, kind of the voice of sports for the last 4 decades. I was such a fan of Later. I've got to admit, a crazy fan. I actually saw the Mary Lou Henner episode live when you did it on that. And yet, Bob, with all that, I have to start here, because the paper of record, the one John and I work for, the New York Post, and the section of record, page 6, has reported that you saved somebody's life with the Heimlich. And here is someplace where we could do it, because I have a couple of strange facts about me. I have saved 3 people's lives with the Heimlich.
Really?
Crazy as that is. Wow. Crazy. One was literally a week after I learned how to do it in a life course when I was 15. Bob, we want to get a little more information because there wasn't a lot there. Where, when, how did you save somebody's life with the Heimlich?
Well, unlike you, I never took a course, and I'd never done it before, but I was familiar with it. Those posters are in restaurants, or you see something on television about it. Shockingly, Page Six got something slightly wrong. People have called it to my attention this morning, so I know what they wrote. And they said that the patron was not dining with me, but in fact, the patron was sitting right next to me, a longtime friend of mine in Syracuse, New York. I was there the weekend before last to talk to classes, and it happened to be homecoming weekend, so I went to the Clemson-Syracuse game and had dinner with a number of friends. So the guy was right there to my left. He started choking, kind of spitting and coughing, and his face was turning crimson. So I just jumped up and did what I thought I should do, and luckily enough, it worked out. I don't know if I saved his life, but I saved him considerable discomfort. That's for sure.
Well, we get to add hero to all the other accolades that I mentioned at the top of the show, Bob.
Amazing.
I'll take it.
I'll ask a little more mundane question. As I'm watching all the games and you're doing the Dodgers series against the Diamondbacks with Ron Darling, all of us work at the MLB Network.
Mm-hmm.
What is wrong with the Dodgers? What is going on? Does it have anything to do with this format that Joel and I are going to discuss today, or is it just not as good as we thought they were?
Well, it's a little bit of both. People always, even the best reporters, kind of retrofit their conclusions based on what's happened. If the Dodgers had won the first two games, it'd be, well, what do you expect? The Diamondbacks barely slipped in. The Dodgers beat them by 16 games in their own division, et cetera, et cetera. You could say Clayton Kershaw has had it. You could say that, but then how do you explain the fact that overall this year he's 13-5, his ERA is about 2.5, and when he came back off the injured shoulder, he was very effective, albeit with shorter stints, 5 innings. That's all that Dave Roberts expected from him in game one. How do you explain that first inning? Hopefully, if they win game 3, he can come back and be closer to the regular season Clayton Kershaw. That's another overarching story. It isn't just about this October. Clayton Kershaw will be a near unanimous first ballot Hall of Famer. We all know that. I'm sure you and Joel will vote for him on the first ballot. But one of the big stories of the generation is, how can a guy who isn't just Hall of Fame good, he's historically good, he's at or near the top in the regular season of every relevant pitching category, and his ERA now in the postseason is 2 runs higher than his regular season ERA. His regular season winning percentage is nearly 700, the best of all time other than Spud Chandler, who won just over 100 games for the great Yankee teams of the 30s and 40s, the best of all time. And he's 13-13 in the postseason. So there's that. I don't know that 2 games accounts for much, but Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman haven't done anything. And the 4 guys who had 100 RBIs each, between them have 1 RBI on a solo home run by JD Martinez. We all know that in baseball, 2 games doesn't necessarily prove anything, except it's magnified in October. If these 2 games happen back-to-back in a 3-game series at Dodger Stadium in June, nobody bats an eye. But this is October, and another overarching story is the Dodgers, maybe like the Braves under Bobby Cox, although the Braves got to 5 World Series, winning only 1. Here are the Dodgers, 10 of the last 11 division titles, and the one they didn't win, they won 106 games. And yet October seems to bring frustration at some point along the line. These are kind of big stories that go beyond this week.
Bob, there's a lot there that I'd love to follow up on, but you mentioned the Kershaw thing, and I want to tell you something that literally happened Saturday night when you were broadcasting that game, the game 1, where he only got 1 out and got beat up pretty good. At about the 3rd inning, I got a text message from a friend of mine who said something like, "Can you believe what Costas said about Kershaw?" And I actually thought maybe I had fallen asleep because I had heard every word in the 1st inning you had said about Kershaw. And then I did what nobody should ever do. I went to see what was trending, and indeed it was trending. And I thought, Bob Costas said Clayton Kershaw's had a great career. He's had a mixed bag postseason. This might be his worst outing ever in the postseason. You obviously said it a lot more gracefully than I just did. And I just wonder, you've broadcast for a long time, this kind of stuff, what does it do to you? Does it back you down from saying what you want to say? Does it bring you great angst? Let me let you talk on this.
Joel, I think it illustrates something larger than any of us. I said this a while back. There are no misdemeanors on the internet or social media, only felonies. And there is no context, there is no nuance, and everybody's a hanging judge. Plus, a lot of that comes, I haven't seen any of it regarding this year, but a lot of it comes from rabid fans of one team or another who are seeing it all through the prism of their own fandom and not understanding what a national broadcaster is supposed to do. I'm trying to hit on the storylines. What I said was this has to be the worst of his disappointing postseason outings. And that's clearly true. But we praised him before he threw his first pitch, and we put his career in context after. And then in game two, we lauded him for being a stand-up guy and standing at his locker and handling all the questions and never using the shoulder as an excuse. And who knows, maybe if there's a game four, he'll come back and be closer to the real Clayton Kershaw. And he has in the postseason, despite that 13-13, he has had some brilliant postseason outings, but it's a mixed bag.
Yep, 2020, he was absolutely brilliant. You're absolutely 100% right about the internet and particularly Twitter. I saw somebody who's fairly prominent on Twitter, at least in the Dodgers circles, wonder out loud if you get paid extra to say bad things about the Dodgers. I mean, the obvious thing to retort to that is there was nothing really good to say about the Dodgers.
Oh my gosh.
You've got to report it as it is, right?
You know, you think you need to be self-critical. And I've always been self-critical, almost to the point where my friends say it's too much. You're losing perspective on this. You know, if it isn't perfect, then I'm obsessing over the imperfection or whatever it might be. But then you get to a point where there are certain things that you just need to discount because it says more about the person who said it than it does about you. And I'm not speaking just for myself. I'm speaking for every network broadcaster. This is a story as old as broadcasting. People will hear the exact same words in Arizona and interpret it as a slight of the Diamondbacks. The exact same words, if you're a Dodger fan and seeing it through that prism, not all of them, but the most rabid of them and the least logical among them, will hear the exact same words and interpret it the same way. The difference is now that social media exaggerates all of that. And sometimes people who should know better in the mainstream media or whatever view that as if it's a pew poll, as if it's some sort of consensus when it's anything but. And I'll give you a story that I think will interest you guys. During the 1986 World Series, one of the greatest World Series ever played, Mets and Red Sox, the great Vin Scully, the gold standard, is doing the games. The NBC station in Boston logged 800 calls one night. Twitter didn't exist then, the internet didn't exist. 800 calls to the switchboard of the NBC station in Boston saying that Vin and Joe Garagiola were biased against the Red Sox. On the same night, roughly 1,000 to the NBC station in New York claiming the opposite. And I think the difference there is only accounted for by the fact that New York has a larger population than Boston. These are people hearing exactly the same words. I guarantee you, none of us has ever received any communication in the past or modern technology, any communication that goes like this. I am a fan of the Cincinnati Reds. Therefore, I had no particular interest in this series between, let's say, the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers. But I was appalled by your lack of objectivity. Not once, not ever, not for any of us. And that should be logically case closed.
You know, Bob, I'll say this. John and I came into broadcasting as a second career. We're continuing to be writers, the podcasting. And one of the things I try to insist to people is if you're going to talk for a long time, you're going to screw up. There's no way to, and I'm talking to Bob Costas, who's the greatest at this. You're going to screw up. And the point I would always make is, as I'm writing a column, like I'm going back and fixing it as I do it. There's typos in real time. There's typos, there's mistakes and stuff. And hopefully then an editor, for the ones I don't get, catches those. And the standard to be held to 3 hours of perfection to your gentle ears seems obscene. And so I just will sort of reiterate a question. Has it changed? Has it forced you to change anything either on or off air in the way that you do your job?
No. I'm trying to do it the same way. And as I said, I'm self-critical. And while I think I can still do a good job and have done a good job on these games, just like a pitcher who can still get people out, you have to make concessions to time. If you can't blow the fastball past everybody, you've got to go about it in a different way. And so, quite honestly, and here's the risk I run here. What I say here in context, somebody's going to pounce on it somewhere. And the antecedent, the question you asked, the tone, the nuance, the context will be lost. And so I'm almost hesitant to say this. But, you know, as you get a little bit older, you lose a little bit of sharpness. So just last night, Mark Pryor goes to the mound in the first inning with Miller struggling. And off the top of my head, I'm just thinking about Mark Pryor. And I say, there's Mark Pryor, who had what looked like a really promising career. And he and Kerry Wood were going to be a tremendous 1-2 punch for a long time for the Cubs. And then injuries derailed both their careers. But I said, in the 90s, I don't know why that popped into my head that way. I can picture them both in 2003. Pryor started that fateful Game 6, the Steve Bartman game at Wrigley Field. I can tell you all the particulars, but it just kind of popped into my head incorrectly. I don't think that was likely to have happened 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years ago. So it might happen once or twice in a broadcast that otherwise is pretty much the same as it's always been. You hope it doesn't happen, but it can happen.
And, you know, we're going to get to some more baseball questions, but I want to ask you something else about your career. Obviously, you've done every sport. You even did some hockey right at the beginning out of Syracuse, but you've been very prominent with the NBA, NFL, MLB. I think your NFL career ended basically, you knew it was going to end at that point where you said that, you know, this is really affecting the brains of the players.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, right now you're at CNN, you're at Turner, you're at MLB Network. Is this what you're going to be doing through the end, baseball mostly? And, you know, any regrets about the ending with the NFL? I wanted to give up watching it myself. I was going to take that stand, and I can't bring myself to do it. I still find myself on the couch every Sunday. So I admire the fact that you were so honest about it. But is this the way you're going to be, you know, throughout the rest of your career as a
you know,
mostly
basically this guy? John, this is basically by design. And the way things get reported today, and this kind of connects to what we were just talking about, it almost always is wrong. And then people react off something that was wrong to begin with and comment on it further. And eventually you're into a distortion machine. As concisely as I can, in 2012, I signed what I intended to be my last contract with NBC. And I said, I'm going to leave football and leave the Olympics after 2016. That was the plan all along. And they said, how about an emeritus clause? We'll keep you around to be to sports what Tom Brokaw was to news. And I said, that's very flattering. That's fine. The comments I made about football, I first made on the air in the 1990s. And I made them very prominently beginning in, 2009, 2010 on NBC and elsewhere. But I think when we got to the emeritus clause and I started commenting on that, honestly, I wasn't like standing on a street corner trying to flag people down to, you know, accost them with my opinions. But if I was asked about it, you know, I talked about it. I think at that point, both parties realized, you know, this isn't a fit anymore. It was a great fit for almost 40 years. It isn't a fit anymore. They didn't fire me and I didn't quit. We had a very amicable and generous settlement, which included a provision that if they ever got baseball back, that I'd come back and do the World Series for them. So if you part in anger, you don't have that kind of clause. So that's what happened. But I always intended to stay with baseball. And the CNN thing is just something on the side. Jeff Zucker, who's not there anymore, had been a colleague of mine at NBC forever. He was running CNN. He said, would you like to be a contributor? Just come on when sports crosses over into news. So I did that. But baseball was always the only thing that I wanted to have on my plate going forward. And I wanted to cut way back, which I certainly have. And I don't know how much longer I'll do this, but I enjoy being around baseball. So there you have it.
Clearly, anyone who's ever spoken to you, and again, John and I are fortunate, we know you over the years, but certainly at the network, we see you at the big events like the Hall of Fame Day, et cetera. We get to talk to you quite a bit. We know your passion's there. If I were there were a bunch of new rules put in this year, generally well received, especially when it came to taking about 30 minutes out of dead time out of the game and shortening it and making it more tolerable across the board. If I were going to make you baseball czar for the day, I'm skipping commissioner, I'm making you czar.
Mhm.
What else would you do? What do you think is necessary to either modernize the game or make it more popular?
Well, first of all, I'm all in on the pitch clock has been tremendously effective. Not so much the larger bases, although that doesn't hurt, but 2 throws over per at bat, only 2 disengagements. That is emboldened base runners. You get more action in the game. Everybody likes that. A tweak, now that pace of play has been solved, really, not just improved, but solved. The ghost runner on second base starting in the 10th inning was a combination of concerns about length of games and also COVID, because they wanted to get players off the field at that time. I think now they could say, look, we're going to play at least 1 inning, maybe 2, straight baseball. We're not going to put a man on second until the 11th inning or maybe even the 12th. I understand that in modern baseball, you don't want a marathon game. We may enjoy it because it's something to look back on because it's part of baseball lore. But managers pull their hair out over it when you got to use your entire pitching staff on an 18 or 19 inning game. But I would like to see it get pushed back. If you're going to have the ghost runner, push it back an inning, maybe 2. And I'm glad that it's not used at all in the postseason, that they're playing real baseball. Also, this is very minor, but I mentioned it last night. Why point to first base on an intentional walk? Again, that was something that was supposed to save 45 seconds, as if that would solve 4-hour games in the postseason. I like the idea of 4 pitches high and wide. The camera goes to the guy in the on-deck circle. He's been dissed. Fans are ticked off because their guy's being given a free pass. You cut to both managers. The strategic wheels are turning. So there's no need for that anymore. Just throw the 4 pitches high and wide. Why don't we make this a discussion instead of a monologue from me? I think that we can tweak the postseason format. You guys go first.
Yeah, we mentioned it. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to ask you about. I think I like it. Joe likes it. Obviously, this is the discussion of the day. I mean, people are up in arms about the fact the Dodgers are in position to lose for the 3rd time to a team that won 15 fewer games than them. I think the teams that won 92 games with all home games are 1-8 so far. So people are up in arms. I think it's a small sample size. I actually like this. I know you have a different. So why don't you tell us what your idea is for the proper format for the post? And by the way, I do like we're biased. At least I like that ghost runner in the regular season because we're on a deadline. But I know most people
right.
Bob,
Right.
just in transparency, in our A block before you joined us, this is exactly what we were talking about, and I do think that our sport tends to kill itself more than other sports. I pointed out the Miami Heat were the 8th seed last year. They went to the NBA Finals. People weren't ready to change the playoffs, right? A 4 and 5 seed played in the NCAA Finals. People talked about that as being a great part of March Madness.
Mm-hmm.
The Bengals went to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago as a 6th seed. It's like, I don't understand why and by the way, the Astros were a number 1 seed last year and won the World Series. And this is the 2nd year of this. Maybe we'll still get a number 1 seed to win a World Series. And why do we need a number 1 seed to win the World Series to feel good about a playoff format?
Well, but I think Bob has a different format, and I've heard it before. I can't remember it. It's complicated in my head right now. It's one of those things where I'm getting old, but I want to hear what your idea is, Bob.
Here's the reason why so many people react differently. Those other sports have no equivalent, not even close, of what used to be called a pennant race and of the long season. And the nature of baseball is that the differences between the best teams, the great but the good but the mediocre from the lousy, that generally plays itself out over a long period of time. If the 2 games we're just talking about between the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers happen in June, nobody bats an eye. In the postseason, I think you want the best, truest test possible within reason. Do you want something that guarantees the best team always wins? Of course not. Or that guarantees that the lesser teams during the regular season don't have a legitimate shot? Of course not. But I think you want a format that is weighted as much as practically possible with advantages for those that have done best over the regular season and appropriate disadvantages. Now, when I first laid it out with Chris Russo, it was slightly different than what I'm about to tell you now, because I think we need a nod toward the rest versus rust argument. I don't know that it always holds. If you asked any manager, would you rather have a bye and not have to subject yourself to the crapshoot of the wild card and run the risk that your team's a little rusty, or would you rather just play right away? 100 managers out of 100 would say, I'll take the bye. I don't want to risk being knocked out in the first round. So, but I think what you could do, as long as divisions matter, and they may not anymore if they get to 32 and you've got 14 divisions and 4 wild cards in a league or whatever the hell it's going to be. But for the moment, if you win the division, that ought to mean something, even if it's the third best division, the Central in most seasons. So they shouldn't be in the wild card round. And if you're in the wild card round, even if you're the second best team in the league, as sometimes happens, like the Dodgers a couple of years ago won 106, they're a wild card team. So you deserve, if you came in through the back door, to be subject to a bit of a crapshoot. But still, you can make distinctions among them. So I think the second and third wild cards, the fifth and sixth overall qualifiers, should play a one-game knockout on the home field of the higher wild card. Yes, it's a crapshoot, but you're a wild card team. Television likes it. Fans, by and large, like it. The survivor of that goes to the home field of the best wild card. So that team only has to win one game. The other has to win 2 to get into the division series. And you could play them on Monday night and Tuesday night, and then you could start the division series on Thursday, so you wouldn't have this complaint about what I'm about to say, which is the division series needs to be best of 7. Now, I know that some people see this through the prism of fandom, and they're saying, oh, you don't want the Diamondbacks to win. No, if you think in the abstract, it has nothing to do with a particular season. It's like when I said that the overtime rule in the NFL was stupid, and it's like, oh, just because the Patriots won or just because the Chiefs lost? No, knucklehead. Look at it beyond the specifics of any given game or any given team. Look at it in the abstract. Why does it make any sense for the LCS and the World Series to be best of 7, but the round that includes potentially the third best division winner and a wild card team, that's the one that's going to be the least true test? Make it best out of 7. And if you get to it quickly enough, then the World Series isn't going to go any deeper into November, and you don't have to cut the schedule back from 162, although you could cut it to 158 or 156 if you felt like it was necessary to accommodate it. And then whatever outcome you get, you're playing a postseason. You know, they don't play the World Series best of 20. So the Cleveland Indians, who went 111 and 43, can lose to Willie Mays and the Giants in 4 straight. Or the 1960 Pirates can get outscored, I think, 55-27 by the Yankees in the series, but still win it. That's part of the beauty of baseball. But you don't want a format that places lesser achievers on closer to an equal footing with the greater achievers during the regular season. So I'd say tweak it to that extent. End of my manifesto.
I'm glad I made you czar.
I like it. I like it. I have a slightly less complex question and somewhat personal. Like you, I grew up on Long Island and caught the tail end of Mickey Mantle's career. And for those people who are actually viewing this, not just listening, behind Bob, you will see, they see 2 pictures, one of Willie Mays to the left of Bob as we look at him, and Mickey Mantle to the right. You know, I did my all-time team, and I had Mickey Mantle instead of Willie Mays. Maybe it was personal, I don't know. And I know that Willie Mays has a much greater WAR and all this, and I got some pushback from a lot of people. Here is my analogy between the two. Tell me why I am crazy and wrong. I think Mantle is like Jordan with a shorter career, only 2/3 of the WAR of LeBron. Jordan having only 67% of the WAR of LeBron. Same with Mantle and Mays. And Mantle won many, many, many more times, and also had a 900 OPS in the postseason, which was the World Series back then, which is spectacular. So to me, you could make a case for Mantle over Mays based on that. I know it's a little different game. One person makes a bigger difference in basketball. Tell me I'm crazy, though. Mantle did lead in the OPS plus, I think, 7 out of 8 years. Pretty darn good.
Here's the, I think, fair way to judge this. Mickey Mantle's career was not as great as his 2 greatest contemporaries, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron. And some younger people might say, well, why was Mantle even in the discussion except that he played for the Yankees? But if you stop the clock after Mantle's, let's say, 14th season, after 1964, then you see that the comparison, at least offensively, makes sense. Mantle diminished his career statistics by hanging around for 4 years when he was completely diminished. he played with injuries for a long time, but he was a true shell of himself, 65 through 68. So his slugging percentage went from something over 580 down to like 557. And most regrettably for him, even though it seems to matter less to analytics-minded people, his lifetime batting average in those 4 years fell from 309 to 298. But the mantle of, let's say, the mid-50s to the mid-60s has a higher slugging percentage, or right around the same, I guess, as Willie Mays, but a much higher on-base percentage because he walked much more than Mays or Aaron did. Many more home runs per time at bat. But having said that, Mays is the greatest defensive center fielder of all time. Aaron was also a better right fielder than Mantle was a center fielder, and they each lasted longer. So even though Mantle was my favorite player growing up, and I think that people who never saw him play or don't appreciate the prime of his career may underrate him, I still couldn't put him on the same plane as Mays or Aaron, but he's somewhere among the dozen or so best position players of all time at his peak.
You know, if John's going to do some passion play when he wrote something for the Gutenberg Press, I guess I get to ask one of my passion questions to wrap up. John mentioned all the stuff you did, including the NBA. He didn't include the ABA. To wrap up,
right.
give us your favorite ABA story, or an ABA story that you love. Because you were there when it was the craziest league that's ever been.
Yeah, and I'm going to go right to the go-to, and people have probably heard it before, but it's kind of the best one. The Spirits of St. Louis, which was my team for the last 2 years of the ABA in the mid-'70s before the league folded and the Spirits didn't get in, they kind of exemplified the ridiculous and the sublime that was the ABA. All kinds of talent, upset Dr. J and the Nets one year in the playoffs, but completely dysfunctional at other times. And the guy who was their biggest star was Marvin Barnes from Providence. They went to the Final Four one year when he was on their team with Ernie DiGregorio. He was the second pick in both the ABA and NBA draft the year he came out, right after Bill Walton. So that tells you how highly regarded he was. And had he not been as self-destructive as he was, I'm pretty sure he would have been on the all-time top 50 25 years ago and the all-time top 75 this past year, but it didn't turn out that way. So Marvin, who was crazy but funny, we play a game in Louisville against the Kentucky Colonels, who are really good. Artis Gilmore, Dan Issel, Louis Dampier, Hubie Brown is the coach. So Louisville's not that far from St. Louis. You can drive it in less than 5 hours, but it's in the Eastern time zone. So we gather at the airport, didn't travel by charters then, gather at the airport early the next morning. The trainer, who doubles as the traveling secretary because we're on a shoestring, hands out the itinerary. And it says TWA flight 305, depart Louisville 8 a.m., arrive St. Louis 7:56. Marvin Barnes beckons me over, drapes an arm around my shoulder, and from more than a foot above me says, bro, do you see this? I said, yes. He goes, well, I don't know about you, but as for me, I am not getting on any time machine. So some people interpreted that as, boy, what a dummy. No. Marvin was actually smart, and he knew what he was saying was funny, and he counted on me to get it because he couldn't necessarily count on Fly Williams to get
it. Well, his nickname, if I remember, was Bad News, right? Marvin Bad News Barnes. The good news is we had Bob Costas, our colleague at MLB Network, but again, the voice of sports for going on about a half a century. Bob, we appreciate you so much joining us on the show.
You know how close to half a century you are? Someone pointed this out to me this week. Thursday, October 12th, is the 50th anniversary of the first professional assignment I ever had, the old Slapshot League in the Eastern Hockey League, the league the Paul Newman movie was based on. October 12th, 1973, Syracuse Blazers at Johnstown Jets, and the Johnstown War Memorial still stands. I was paid $30 and $5 a day meal money on the road, and I would have paid them $30 to do the games if I had $30 at the time.
Well, congratulations for that. But, you know, I got to ask you when you say that, because I looked at your Wikipedia, it says Syracuse, and you've given, you know, you've got a scholarship there. You've done so much. They're so proud of you. It said did not graduate and then went immediately to his professional career.
Yeah.
Is that you were just so excited to get into your professional career that you skipped the final course, or what happened?
Here's what happens. When I got the Blazers job, I cut my credits back from the usual 15 to 9. So that left me 12 credits shy of graduation, which I was going to make up the following fall, my class graduated in May, I figured I'd be doing a second season of the Blazers. And then I land the job with the Spirits, not just a step up in terms of the ABA, but the games are on KMOX in St. Louis, a 50,000 watt powerhouse. Jack Buck, Harry Carey, Joe Garagiola, later Joe Buck. It's a mecca of sports broadcasting. So I would have been nuts to say, gee, I'd love to take this job, but I got 12 credits to complete.
Okay.
So I
That
split for
explains
St.
it.
Louis.
Very good. All right.
Well,
Well,
Bob, we got the teaser. The next time we have you on, we're going to have to get the great stories from the Slapshot Hockey League.
And there are many of them.
Yes, we can't wait.
Sure.
And again, John and I appreciate you joining us on the show.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, John. See you soon.
We, of course, thank Bob Costas for joining us. John, hit or error as we complete the first week of the MLB playoffs.
And of course, we're still in the middle of the playoffs, so you never know. Things could change. But at this point, I'm going to have to say Clayton Kershaw gets my error. He is the best pitcher of this generation, even better than Verlander and Scherzer. Easily number one. Incredible regular season resume. He did win in 2020, and he won some games. But his ERA now, after this last game, in which his ERA was 162 for that game, 162.006 runs, 1 out. That gets you a 162 ERA, is now 4.5, 2 runs higher than it is in the regular season. So Clayton Kershaw gets my error. I feel a little bad doing it because he is an all-time great, but that was quite a bad performance that got the Dodgers off on a bad start.
Yeah, he's clearly seems to me to be a compromised pitcher. The Diamondbacks didn't take a bad swing as if they knew what was coming.
Could be.
And he's one of the most deceptive pitchers in baseball history, besides being one of the best. For them to get such good swings feels to me like something else was going on there. John, I'm going to do a hit, and it's just going to be the back end of, we're talking about this the day after the Braves tying up their division series. Michael Harris makes a great catch to bail out Raisel Iglesias for what is the second out. And then he throws the ball back to the infield. Bryce Harper is trying to make sure he scores from first base. He's rounded second. Austin Riley makes just that's my hit of the week, is a tremendous play when you think about it. It feels to me the closest thing to the Derek Jeter flip play that I've seen since the Derek Jeter flip play, because it took awareness, athleticism, calm in the storm. This is a third baseman rushing across the infield. He smoothly backhands the ball the opposite way he'd normally feel the backhand, back to the infield instead of front, which means he has to spin the opposite direction. He does it without bobbling the ball. In one motion, fires a dart true to Matt Olson at first base to end the game with a double play. The timeliness, the baseball IQ, the athleticism to do that, besides the fact that Riley had hit the home run to put them ahead in this game, that is an all-time classic game by a player with an all-time play to end it.
Yeah, I mean, they're extremely well coached. I mean, the hitting coach has to be a genius. The hitting they did this year, incredible. I mean, they have Ron Washington, Walt Weiss. Seitzer is the hitting coach. Obviously, very instinctual play by an instinctual player. Austin Riley is terrific. The Braves are the best team. We'll see if they get through it. Well, that'll say something about this playoff format that people will be talking about, rightly or not. So I would say the Braves are great. I'm a little disappointed in their fans, though. They could have been my error this year with the throwing garbage on the field. And then
that was terrible.
I think they said it was a sellout, and yet there were empty seats. So they get a little bit of error here, but the players on the Braves definitely hit.
Well, we'll know a lot more about the Braves situation and the rest of the playoffs if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and Jon Heyman. It's a podcast from the New York Post. As always, we thank our producers, Jake Brown and Andrew Hartz, for helping us through with the show. Don't forget, the show drops on the Yes app every Wednesday at about noon. Give that a view. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating. It really does help. And John, we'll keep grinding through the playoffs. Me and you were heading off to the LCS over the weekend. You to the National League, me to the American League. We'll meet at the World Series, and we'll keep doing the show with Joel Sherman and Jon Heyman.